Pozdravljene, dobrodošli na predavanju dr. Dore Komnenović, ki je pravzaprav povratnica v tem smislu. Dr. Dora Komnenović je doktorica družbenih in kulturoloških ved in se je v zadnjih letih ukvarjala z vprašanjem odpisov, knjižničnih odpisov v času pretresov. To je tudi področje njenega glavno, ko bi se reklo, area studies, njenega raziskovanja. Namreč predvsem se osredotoča na pojugoslovanski kontekst in na Nemško demokratično republiko. Deluje v okviru Leibnicovega centra v Potsdamu, kakor tudi berlinskega arhiva. In zakaj ta tema... Dober dan, dobrodošli. Ne, sploh ni problem. In zakaj ta tema, zakaj je relevantna? To je predavanje, ki je znotraj cikla Biba Buba Baja, ustvarjanje za otroka socializma. To je projekt, ki ga zadnjih 2,5 leti zasledujemo med drugim na Inštitutu za kulturne in spominske študije in ki se ukvarja z umetniškim ustvarjanjem za otroke v času socialistične Jugoslavije znotraj založništva. Seveda, ob tem raziskovanju je potem ta tema nekaj, s čimer se pravzaprav vsakodnevno srečujemo. Namreč postsocialistični pretresi, ki so marsikaterega celo založniškega giganta pahnili v bankrot. S tem so bili izgubljeni celotni arhivi, recimo primer Nove Makedonije, kjer je delovala otroška založba Decka Radost, pravzaprav cel arhiv je romal na smetišče. Hkrati pa seveda tako, da knjižnice delajo, kakor nam bo razložila tudi Dora Komnenović, morajo delati odpise. In to potem pomeni, da je veliko te produkcije pravzaprav zastopano le z enim arhivskim primerkom. To je seveda tudi vezano na same procese kanonizacije in zgodovinjenja znotraj založništva oziroma literature za otroke. So predvsem preživela tista dela, ki so žanrsko bila umeščena v neko polje fantastike, kar je bilo recimo v slovenskem kontekstu, so to dela Ele Peroci, Polonce Kovač kasneje, v srbskem Dragana Lukića, v makedonskem Neuma Popevska, Olivere Nikolajeve in tako naprej. Druga dela, ki pa so se naslanjala bolj na druge vidike, ki so bile značilne za to književnost, to je predvsem seveda spomin na NOB, hkrati na neko drugačno družbenost, ki jo je uvedla socialistična družba, na modernizacijske procese znotraj te družbe. Te knjige pa so pravzaprav bolj arhivske in moram priznati, da smo potem skupaj z vnukom ugotovili, da pravzaprav večino gradiva, ki smo ga znotraj študije pregledali, da pravzaprav ga imamo v Sloveniji, vendar deloma še ni kategorizirano. Jugoslavika, se pravi fond knjig iz področja bivše Jugoslavije, se je za letošnjim februarjem tudi ustavila. Skratka, ta fond se ne polni več, utemeljitev je bila na račun bogatenja Slovenike. Tako da jaz bi zdaj predala besedo Dori, da nam pove, kako je tudi med drugim v slovenskem okolju, kjer je to raziskovala prav na našem Inštitutu za kulturne in spominske študije. Tako da, Dora, dobrodošla, hvala, da si se odzvala povabilu in tvoj je oder.
Hvala, draga Katja. My Slovenian is unfortunately not good enough, so I hope you don't mind if I switch to English. So good morning once again. It is a great pleasure to be here, to be in Ljubljana, and I'm deeply grateful to the organizers of this event, in particular to Katja Kobold and the curatorial team of the wonderful exhibition Biba Buba Baja for inviting me, and of course to all of you for coming. During the next 45 to 50 minutes, I would like to share with you some of my research findings and thoughts on book discarding and socio-political transformations in the post-Yugoslav space. These were published in book form in 2022 by IBIDEM. In the past decade, the term post-Yugoslavia asserted itself in academic circles and in the works of authors examining current cultural practices in the region and their potential in dealing with the often stigmatized socialist past. On the slide, you can see some of these contributions. The attractiveness of the term is given by its spatial, Yugoslavia, and temporal, post, meaning, and by the relation that with Yugoslavia, the post implies both a break and a continuity with its legacy, as Beronja and Vervaet write in post-Yugoslav constellations. That is still present, despite more or less successful attempts at ethno-nationalizing cultural spaces in the region. It is precisely this entanglement between continuity and discontinuity, as well as the tension that informs the relation between remembrance and forgetting, to quote Bukli and Lucas, but also presence and absence, in the sense that it is not just that memorials commemorate and iconoclasm causes forgetfulness, that provided a conceptual framework to my research and will be mentioned every now and then in today's presentation. In the first part of my talk, I would like to dwell upon discarding as a research topic and address the issue from an institutional point of view, while in the second section, the focus will be more on the afterlife of discarded books, that is, on books as such. I look forward to a lively discussion following my input, but feel free to interrupt me in case you have any immediate questions. Let us start with a simple question, just to make sure that we are all on the same page. What is discarding? There are other professional terms that are often used in English, but I like this word in particular since outside of the library context, it is also used to say to get rid of something useless or unwanted. Often called deaccession, reverse selection, deselection, pruning, retirement, and relegation, weeding consists in removing books and other materials from a library collection to another location. That can range from a larger library to a storage site or a book sale. And even if these two terms, weeding and discarding, are often used as synonyms or interchangeably, they're actually not synonyms, since weeding can also involve storing, that is, keeping the material at a second level of access. We could translate this in everyday life terms as follows. After tidying up your house, you decide to store some of your household items in the basement or in your garage, while you give others away, be it to family and friends or to a recycling facility. So to put it simply, when a book is discarded, it is no longer property of the library. Whereas when it's weeded, it can still, it still belongs to it. Librarians in the room, if there are any, are more than welcome to intervene if you find my definitions imprecise. But contrary to what happens between our four walls, in libraries there are international standards and national regulations that make sure this is carried out appropriately and that no book gets permanently lost. There are 5 ways to dispose of discarded materials. That is selling, donating, trading, recycling, and destroying by incineration or by throwing into the trash. Professional manuals encourage librarians to use the latter method only as a last resort because it can create the so-called weeding controversy, since people are shocked by the waste, in inverted commas, of throwing good books, in inverted commas, on the trash heap and interpret it as a destruction of valuable books. On the slide, you can see 2 2 newspaper reports which were published on the occasion of a major discarding action undertaken by the Oton Župančić Library in Ljubljana in November 1989. Maybe some of you remember the occurrence. Actually, the article on your left side is a report about the occurrence, whereas the article or the letter on the right-hand side is the reaction that the then director of the library published a day or two later. And both were published in the Delo newspapers. And reports about the event were also published in Dnevnik around the same time, so November, December 1989. So this is now just an example to show you that the perception that non-librarians have of discarding is often diametrically opposed to the way professionals think about it. What is valuable to the reader does not have to be equally valuable to the librarian, let alone to the library accountant. And public libraries, believe it or not, are expected to regularly discard parts of their collection, contrary to what non-professionals might think, since they usually tend to have this vision of libraries as being some sort of archives. But why do libraries discard? Well, the reasons may range from a lack of space to the existence of duplicate copies, but also in order to keep their collections up to date and to adjust them to the needs of their patrons. So what is normally discarded? Books or other materials of poor appearance or poor content, unused materials, that is, materials that have not circulated in the past 3 to 5 years, or books that can be obtained elsewhere. There is a catchy acronym that is often cited in connection with weeding criteria, and that is MUSTY. M stands for misleading, U stands for ugly, S is superseded, T is trivial, I irrelevant, E elsewhere, that is, may be obtained elsewhere. And ideally, 5% of the collection should be weeded each year. But libraries tend to discard way too little, actually, so way below 5%. And discarding is usually not carried out as regularly as these national and international guidebooks and regulations would require. But what happens in times of upheaval and social-political change? To put it in Mary Douglas' words, when a new order is being constituted, the rejected bits and pieces are seen as a danger and are discarded. And it is at this stage that they are dangerous, right? And so here is a citation taken from a newspaper article that was published in December 1990 that is here to bring us back to the time that I will be talking about today, starting with 1989. And it is an article titled Epoch on the Junkyard, written by the Croatian journalist Jasmina Kuzmanović. And I quote, "Similar scenes are appearing from Sofia to Riga and probably even more to the east. The classics of Marxism and local theoreticians are abandoning library shelves and offices or are being sold for pennies. Books and monuments, as the ideological furniture of the previous epoch, now have recycling or museums as options." End of quote. The weeding and discarding that ensued after the collapse of communism was seen as the ideologization of library holdings by some and as bookicide by others. In the case of Yugoslavia, due to the wars that laid it to rest, a simple web search reveals a certain terminological confusion on what the said libricide or bookicide is, whether destruction refers to the violent damaging of monuments and books in conflict-ridden areas or outside the war zone, and whether books were actually burned or if the expression was used metaphorically. The war-related destruction of libraries and its most powerful symbol, the burning of the National and University Library in Sarajevo, archives, churches, and cultural heritage, as well as the deliberate destruction of partisan monuments in Croatia, some of which were prime examples of Yugoslav modernist architecture and had a high artistic value, have already been the object of several scholarly studies, documentary films, exhibitions, and other projects. but the so-called cleansing of libraries, less so. And studying discarding in the post-Yugoslav space and in general, in particular this murky discarding, is important because it is often performed, but largely unknown to non-professionals, which continuously produces controversies and thus deserves to be thematized across disciplines and not only within the field of librarianship. The scandal it generated in the 90s in Croatia tells volumes about the society where it happened, and discarding does not end with books being released from libraries. On the contrary. While the post-1989 cleansing of libraries might not be a former Yugoslav idiosyncrasy, certain developments in Croatia make this case stand out. A study on the topic, and here I refer to the book Libricid, Destruction of Books in Croatia in the 1990s by Ante Lešaja, in which the author estimates that Croatian library collections shrank by 2.8 million in the period between 1990 and 1995, which would equal to 55% of library materials in school libraries and 2.4% in public libraries. So a study on the topic, abundant newspaper accounts, and meager quantitative data made me look at this case in greater detail and to compare it with a neighboring country that did not go through a protracted war and that, had the prophecy published in The Economist in October 1990 materialized, would have formed, together with Croatia, a northwestern province called Slovenia. The former westernmost republics of Yugoslavia continued to perform better economically and went through a swifter Euro-Atlantic integration than their southern neighbors, and were both characterized by a strong drive towards distancing themselves from their Yugoslav past and the Balkans, perceived as symbols of underdevelopment, periphery, and barbarism. In her 1990 article, Epoch on the Junkyard, which I have already cited, Jasmina Kuzmanović describes the removal of monuments and books in Eastern Europe after the collapse of communism. No negative emotions are involved in the process of removal, she writes, because, I quote, "What is leaving are not books in the true sense of the word, but the ideological paraphernalia of previous systems," end of quote. In Croatia, events are unfolding pretty much as elsewhere. I quote again, first, the initiative to bring back the monument to Ban Jelačić, followed by the intervention into the ideologically colored names of squares and streets. Last in the row is the great tidying up of governmental offices, and then, I guess, of municipalities, libraries, and community centers, end of quote. So until that point, the cleansing of libraries is not an exclusively Croatian phenomenon. An article by Micha Harkötter, published in the German daily Die Tageszeitung, commonly known as Taz, on August 10, 1994, also reports about the cleansing, in inverted commas, of public libraries in the former German Democratic Republic, the modernization of school books, in inverted commas, and again, in inverted commas, the destruction of books, most of which originated from the so-called workers' libraries. He writes that, I quote, "Reunification began in the cultural field with the biggest book destruction in the post-war period," end of quote. 4 years after Kuzmanović's article was written, Croatia is an independent state, so we are talking about the year 1994, and unlike East Central European post-socialist countries, it is at war and does not have control over parts of its territory. In July 1994, a concerned reader wrote a letter to Novi List in which he expressed his disagreement and concern about, I quote, "the crusade against unsuitable books that has been going on for 4 years in the Croatian parliament," end of quote. Although it is not clearly stated, it is implied that unsuitable books are those that make references to or are written in the so-called Serbo-Croatian language. Now, I would like to read another quote that was written by Nikica Mihaljević and published in Delo, actually published in Slovenia, and these were actually 3 articles written by Mihaljević in January 1993, which exemplifies and illustrates well the atmosphere in Zagreb and in Croatia as such at the time. So I quote, "Recently in Ljubljana, on Plečnik Square, I came across a street bookseller. It did not cross anyone's mind to admonish the man for selling Serbian books. For me, this was a welcome surprise, because in Zagreb, something like that cannot even be imagined. It was equally impossible to imagine, only a couple of years ago, that in the center of cultured, in inverted commas, and civilized Zagreb, books would be cut into noodles and libraries cleansed from everything Serbian and Cyrillic and from everything non-Croatian. The future of Slovenian books is also not bright at all." End of quote. And it is around the same time that the Zagreb public libraries discard more than ever in the period between 1988 and 1998. So if we focus in particular on the years 1993 and 1994, we will quickly see that the discarding of books was way higher than the acquisition of new volumes, which is, in a way, surprising, to say the least, for a country at war that does not have funds to acquire new books. Unfortunately, what these statistics do not tell us is the type of books that were discarded. They also remain silent about the reasons of this discarding, so we can only make assumptions. But these numbers do show that there was a clear discrepancy between acquisition and discarding. And this is something that is currently also happening in Ukraine, where Russian books are being massively discarded, and in some cases English books are being acquired in order to somehow equalize it, even if the majority of the population, that is of library patrons, do not even speak English. The example that I mentioned before when I read the quotation by the concerned reader, this example shows that the tidying up that Kuzmanović announced in 1990s in Croatia involved not only ideological paraphernalia, but also, for one reason or another, unsuitable books. And at the end of 1999, the journalist Davorka Vukov-Colić was able to ascertain that the removal of unsuitable books is only, and this is a quote now, is only a part of a much wider process of adjusting culture to new times and a new ideological environment that is more or less completed today. End of quote. So this was in the year 1999. These 3 articles, and I'm referring to Jasmina Kuzmanović, Davorka Vukov-Colić, and the letter of the concerned reader, provide the framework for the analysis of the developments in the removal of books à la Croate. Like in other post-socialist states, libraries and other institutions needed to be adapted to the new system, but due to the prevalence of language policies promoting a clear differentiation between the Croatian and Serbian languages, which was not first formulated in 1990, the removal process involved a larger corpus of books. Yet, this is not the only specificity of the Croatian case. It is the frame within which the debate was conducted. An anti-communist mood characterized pretty much all post-socialist states in the 90s, and to a large extent it still does. But in Croatia, the public discourse was further polarized by the state of war and a certain anti-Serbian and anti-Yugoslav hysteria. By the time the topic of the cleansing of libraries resurfaced again with the mediatic exposure of the Korčula case, and this happened in the year 1997, when the local librarian threw into the trash can between 100 and 150 books, even if mostly of Serbian authors in Cyrillic script or published outside of Croatia. When it comes to the number of books, newspaper reports sometimes refer to 100 to 150, other times to 300, 400 books, but I would say that around 100 books would be a rather fair estimate. So by the time the Korčula scandal broke out, the frame had partially changed in Croatia compared to the period I was talking about before, but the anti-Serbian mood did not. The throwing of books, many of which were published in other parts of former Yugoslavia, into the garbage, coincided with the statement by the then Minister of Finance about cleansing libraries from books in Serbian and similar languages. And this is a quote by Borislav Škegro. The government will introduce measures for galvanizing the publishing that the Croatian state needs. For instance, public libraries will be financed to remove books in Serbian and similar languages, or those with inappropriate and obsolete translations. End of quote. So in this period, the country was no longer at war, and Tudjman's authoritarian style of government could no longer be justified with an external threat, but the conflict with an external enemy was replaced by an internal, and that is by a Croatian confrontation between critically minded intellectuals and the supporters of the regime. And in such a highly polarized environment, writing about Korčula became a metonym for fighting against the regime where corruption and political crime was the order of the day. To put it in the words of one of the journalists who was one of the first to have exposed the Korčula case and to have written about it, I think the Korčula case was exposed too little. And that my question was whether it had been a bit overblown in the media and how it was presented. And his answer to this was, I think it was exposed too little. I personally never had in mind a media scandal that could in any way be lucrative, but simply writing about something that the mainstream does not want to ask and question. Besides Feral Tribune, no one even wanted to take it into account as relevant. The perpetrators did not have to face any particular consequences, apart from some kind of scandal, and that also says something about the final balance sheet of the media writings about that. End of quote. Feral Tribune asserted itself as an uncompromisingly critical media outlet that was among the first to report about Croatian crimes during the war in Bosnia, and it was often the target of governmental attempts at silencing it with different pornographic taxes for pornographic material and so on and so forth until the media outlet was discontinued in 2008. So in this whole case, professional librarians were more like extras, that is, background actors in the whole issue. While on the one hand, this could be explained by the fact that the debate did not unfold among professionals, but in newspapers. On the other, it is hard to understand that the profession that felt attacked and negatively affected by the scandal did not feel the need to intervene. And I base my conclusions on this report, that is the country report by the International Federation of Library Associations for Croatia from the year 2001, which is usually edited in a way that questionnaires are sent to libraries and who then send these back to the association. So this is something that came from Croatia. And here it says, the image of the librarian in the press and other media has not been favorable due to a number of articles published in the last few years describing librarians as persons responsible for extensive book purges. In the war and post-war years, full stop. Apart from the article where individual librarians accused of being of book cleansing have been named, there is a number of articles in which the library profession as a whole has been qualified as guilty of book cleansing, burning, and purging. So one would expect that if the profession feels in this way, the profession would react and would make sure that, that it issues statements that in a way criticize what has been written in the media. But this is unfortunately not what necessarily happened, but the approach was rather that of let them speak. This is in fact not something that concerns the profession. It is just people who have no clue about what libraries do and how they do it. Which on the other hand is contrary to what happened in Ljubljana when a weeding controversy broke out in 1989. The librarians here were very fast in reacting to that and in explaining what had actually happened. And in fact, with that, I do not want to say that librarians were not subject to pressures in the 90s. They were. They were exposed to great pressure that was not only coming from above, that is from local and state authorities, but also from their patrons, that is from the users of the libraries who wish to see certain books displayed and others less so. And when I talk about pressures from above, I mainly refer to two instructions. Well, actually, one was just an instruction that was supposed to be circulated among librarians, but was never supposed to become public. So it was only for internal use, and it was published in 1992. And here I have just an excerpt from this instruction, which reads, school library collections should contain works exclusively by Croatian authors or translators, written in the Croatian standard language and Latin script. Exceptionally, authors of other nationalities, if their works are to be found in the list of suggested readings. So this is just as a way of exemplifying what kind of pressures librarians were exposed to. Also at a local level, this is, for example, taken from a letter that the president of the steering committee of the Ivan Vidali Library in Korčula, and that is the library where the librarian who threw the 150 books in the trash can was working. So the member of the president of the steering committee sends a letter to the then head of the library, demanding the removal of Vladimir Dedier's book Vatikan i Jasenovac, published in English as the Yugoslav Auschwitz and the Vatikan, the Croatian massacre of the Serbs during World War II, with the following wording. It is commonly known what kind of truths, so-called truths and so-called documents are presented in it. Because of that, this book and numerous similar works written on the topic of the again, alleged genocidal inclination of the Croats and the church in Croatia were published in the former system in Yugoslavia and widely distributed. So much about the local level. And some of the people I had formal and less formal conversations with who were in one way or another involved in the library field and in the book business would sometimes even claim that these were not isolated cases and would not exclude the circulation of other secret instructions. After all, it was even the 1992 to 1994 Minister of Education, Culture and Sport, Vesna Gerardi-Jurkic, who claimed herself later that she was exposed to pressure and that this was basically the mildest one could sign in that period of time. So to sum up, even if the state did not directly request the removal of Serbian or socialist books from public libraries, because as I said before, the instruction that I quoted refers and was directed at school libraries. So even if this did not refer to public libraries, the hiring of suitable people, political statements encouraging the persecution of the Serbs and political opponents, and a general atmosphere of fear made it increasingly hard to keep a cool head. Nevertheless, the numerous public libraries across the country are heterogeneous entities, which suggests the use of caution when making general observations. Despite these pressures coming from different sides, most decisions were taken at an individual level or in small teams, and in fact, discarding is a rather arbitrary procedure. And once the first newspaper articles on inappropriate discarding appeared, professional librarians failed to react. An even greater failure is the tepid reaction of professional librarians associations like the Croatian Library Association and the Croatian Council on Libraries, as well as state authorities to the so-called Korčula case. The latter acquired a grotesque dimension with lawsuits against the main critics of libricid, and that was the philosopher Milan Kangraga and the weekly Feral Tribune. And as the previously mentioned IFLA report on Croatia argues, what happened in Korčula harmed the overall reputation of librarians who did not even try to reach out to the public and to present their work to citizens who, for their part, in many cases, do not know that even libraries discard books from time to time. And with this let them talk approach, professionals left the debate, but were at the same time not able to provide concrete inputs which would have ended mystifications and further politicization. Since similar debates keep resurfacing today, be it in the form of endless discussions about school readings or book destruction, it is indispensable that professionals take their share of responsibility and the data about publicly relevant issues and services be made available to citizens. There is plenty of professional literature as well as legal and less binding instructions that provide detailed guidelines on how to proceed. The problem was and remains implementation. In fact, empirical evidence shows that in some cases discarding in Croatia was much more improvised than it should have been. Furthermore, some of the structural problems that libraries had to face in the 90s are still present. And with this, I mean insufficient funding, lack of professional staff, but also interference of the state in the acquisition policy due to the various subsidies that are reserved for publishing houses and so on and so forth. Now, the reason why the comparison with Slovenia is significant is in understanding, it helps actually understanding how a standard library practice was mismanaged and turned into a political scandal, and in that respect became a unicum in former Yugoslavia. I was also curious to test the assumption whether the war contributed to the frenzy and the destruction of cultural artifacts even outside the war zones. Also, what is interesting to note is that articles about book discarding in Croatia appeared relatively early in Slovenia. We saw one excerpt from one of the 3 articles published by Nikica Mihaljević back in 1993, which inevitably led to comparisons and to the point of fingers. But contrary to Croatia, in Slovenia there were no publicly recorded cases of politically motivated discarding, and the librarians with whom I had the pleasure and honor to talk to confirmed this. However, hearsay stories do circulate, for instance, of burnings, book burnings being ordered from Ljubljana. This is, for example, from a blog by Dimitrij Anakiev, in which he states that in a Slovenian small town, he doesn't name it, he met the cleaning lady of the local school who brought him some Serbian books that she had allegedly saved from fire and that came from the local library, local public library and the local school library. So this is one of the cases that one can trace in Slovenia, and the other one would be disagreements about the destiny of approximately 300,000 books of the Yugoslav People's Army that were allegedly left in Slovenia. And there was an action started by the man who allegedly sold 2 million used books to the Slovenes, trying to find out what happened to these books. And he received different answers from the Ministry of Defense, which once stated that the books were given to the library of that ministry, whereas later on this was basically negated, and it was said that this never took place. And what is more, statistics in Slovenia show that acquisition was always higher than discarding. Again, this does not give and provide any information about the titles and about the reasons for discarding, but we can see, and this table is compiled by putting together, so I put together all the data that was published actually yearly, so separately for each year. So in contrary to Croatia and Slovenia, collections kept growing. I'm sorry, it's a bit too small. But discarding always stayed below 4%. And we said that the international standard is somewhere between 3 and 5%. What is interesting is that there is no data for the years 1997 to 2000. And according to the librarian who was in charge of these statistics and of compiling them and editing them, this was because libraries were discarding too little. So sometimes, and this is again done by sending questionnaires to libraries then send back. When there was no discarding, that they would leave this field blank. Now, I would slowly move. I think I have some 15 minutes or so. So I would like to move to what I promised at the beginning, and that is the fate of discarded books. So the afterlife of discarded books. And I wanted to do this by using two examples, one of which is probably the most famous discarded book and in Croatia, and that would be Branko Čopić's The Hedgehog's Home. And the other example would be the exhibition Action Discarded, which took place in Zagreb in June 2015, that is 2015. So if there is anything that the increased discarding from public libraries and ensuing debate brought about as a result in Croatia is the emergence of the category of the discarded. And these discarded are not only books that were unofficially discarded from libraries, but also all volumes that lost currency after the dissolution of Yugoslavia, be it because of their content, because they are no longer included in the school program, or simply because they are written in Serbo-Croatian language. Many of these books are still to be found in private family libraries, but are also publicly available again, or never stopped being so. And as such, they act as metonyms of memory and have a certain potential as discussion triggers. So to put it in Osmanian terms, there is a certain reverse affinity between archives and trash cans, because in trash cans, the forgotten, the rejected, is ipso facto remembered. So, and what I was saying before, so here I was playing, when I'm using this category of the discarded, I'm a bit playing also with Mary Douglas' notion of purity, impurity, but also with Mark Thompson's theory on garbage. So whatever is discarded but is still visible, still maintains the value that it had in the previous order, and this endangers the new order that is being created. So had this discarding been carried out as it should have by the rules and regulations of the profession, no one would have probably noticed it. But in this way, this actually propels reflections and remembrance of what was, but also of what is today and what might be in the future. So to go back to the Hedgehog in Search of a Home, it's a book that basically is known to different generations of people who grew up in Yugoslavia or even in post-Yugoslavia. And the significance of this book in the childhood of many was probably best summarized by Goran Vojnović in his book, Southern Scum Go Home. And I quote, "There is no chance for us and the Slovenes. Everything starts when we are kids. Their parents read fucking pedant peds and slipper cats to them, while ours read hedgehogs' homes and grgačvaraks to us. And from then on, everything goes to hell. Everyone goes their separate ways, and there is nothing that would put us together anymore. We can hang out together, understand each other, and pretend to be colleagues and all, but we cannot really get each other, like brothers. We don't have the same things in our blood. We are Southerners and they are Slovenes. And that's it. Fuck it. Branko Čopić and Jovan Jovanović Zmaj are to be blamed." So Ježova kućica is a fable written in the form of a long poem, published for the first time in Yugoslavia in 1949. It tells the story of a hedgehog who defends his humble home against a fox, a bear, a wolf, and a wild boar. And with its simple message, "There is no place like home," and musicality achieved through rhyme, the book became very popular among children and their parents. The Hedgehog's Home was successfully adapted into theater plays and animated films, most recently by Eva Cvijanović in a beautiful 2017 film that is, I think, available online. What is more, towards the end of last year, a participatory exhibition on this book was opened at the Museum of Yugoslavia in Belgrade, and it should be on display until September this year. So I encourage you to visit if you haven't done so. So how did this book become a discarded book in Croatia? It was added to the recommended elementary school readings in 1960, but it was then removed in 1993. Why was it removed? Well, as one of the proponents of this removal wrote, the linguist Stjepan Babić, it is the poem written in the Serbian language is not suitable for first graders if left untranslated. Even if it has been partially adopted or translated to the Croatian language, it remains incomprehensible to Croatian pupils and or would require too many additional explanations, end of quote. And since then, since 1993, there have been several debates in the media whether the book should be brought back to the list, whether it should be taken out again. But the thing is, it's a matter of fact, it hasn't been reinserted into the list since 1993. So this is again something similar to what it has been happening with all these weeding controversies. When these debates basically leave the academic sphere and then take place elsewhere. In the end, what matters is, I think, and this is what has been brilliantly summarized by Mariana Hammerschak, that reading lists are rarely good indicators of the actual individual reading assignments in elementary schools. What matters more is the interests that publishers, for example, have in seeing their re-editions placed on the list. For instance, in 2005, when it was decided that The Hedgehog's Home should not be included in the reading list, the owner and director of the publishing house, Katarina Zrinski, reacted publicly, accusing Babić in the press of having caused considerable material damage to his company, which had received permission from the copyright owner, the Branko Čopić Endowment, to reprint the book with a glossary of less known words. What also makes this particular case interesting is that Nives Opačić, another prominent linguist from Croatia, mentions it in connection with the so-called cleansing of libraries in one of her articles in 2006. And basically she claims that the book, that only certain editions of the book were present in the Zagreb City Library when she went there and checked. And this is exactly, this example can illustrate how it is difficult to establish whether a book was discarded for political or ideological reasons or not. Because first of all, since the Zagreb City Library is not the National and University Library and The Hedgehog's Home is not a book that could be subsumed under the category of local studies, the library is not obliged to keep all the possible and imaginable editions of this book. Also, what is not clear in this account is whether the missing editions were not there at the moment when the author went to check, or whether they were simply borrowed. Also, what is surprising is that there is a gap. So there was an edition from 1949, and then nothing until 1983. Presumably the library did possess at least some of these copies for a certain period of time, but in order to be sure about that, the researcher should need and would need to check the inventory book of the library, where it should also be stated if and when these copies were discarded. But there is a problem with that, because according to the Act on Librarianship, libraries should prepare this review and reading report, but they are usually not kept longer than 10 years. And this is often also sometimes negotiated differently within the library. So if we do not have access to such a report, we can only guess which reasons might have induced librarians to discard them. Low circulation can be immediately discarded in this kind of case, as the discarded here is probably not the best term, but it can be excluded, since these were years in which the book was included in the reading list. This fact leads us to other potential reasons. We can in fact test it based on the MUSTI guidelines. So M, misleading and factually inaccurate. It is interesting that the hotly debated and highly controversial editions of the book from 1999, 2001 and 2001 and 2002 that were published without the name of the author on the cover, and that also featured some changes when it comes to the language. So words were replaced. For example, dragi or drug, comrade, friend, was replaced with dragi, dear, but also the corresponding illustrations by Vilko Selangliha were whitewashed to hide this noun, and others. So these, for example, which would fit under the category of misleading or factually inaccurate, were present there. And then S, superseded by a new edition, could be the reason why some of the older editions are missing, but that doesn't explain why the library still keeps an edition from 1949. Whereas the other letters T, I, and E do not seem to apply in this case. So if the missing editions were discarded because Branko Čopić is a Bosnian Serb, or because they were written in the Serbian language or published outside of Croatia, why was the 1949 edition kept? Or the one published in Sarajevo in 1988. In any case, I then contacted the Children's Library in Zagreb by email and by phone to find this out. And the head of the library answered by saying that detailed documents about discarding are archived for a maximum period of 11 years, and this is in this case a period set by the library itself. Based on an oral agreement with the State Archive, the library is only obliged to keep those until the completion of all the activities related to one financial year. Furthermore, inventories of books do not contain data about the reasons for discarding a particular volume. And the Zagreb City Library is a public library and is not obliged to keep all the editions of a book. And the library had also concluded by saying that all weeding and discarding are carried out based on professional regulations. And why am I mentioning this example? Because these are all considerations that are not self-evident to a non-librarian. And if this is put into the context of the cultural climate in Croatia, which also produced the previously mentioned reworking of Čopić's poem in the 90s, and the various articles in the media on the destruction of book and cultural heritage to which professionals barely reacted, it is understandable that the public connects missing books with ideological cleansing. Most people, including highly educated professionals, are not at all acquainted with library policies, which is why libraries should reach out more to their readers, invite them to explore what librarians actually do and what the functions of a library are. And one such project that tried to bring the practice of discarding of books closer to the users is Otpisani, the discarded, which was introduced in 2010 at the Maribor University Library, and during that action, furniture and other items were produced by using discarded books. So this would be one such example, and I would now like to use the last 5 minutes or 4, I don't know how much time do I have left, to quickly introduce another initiative to you, and this is the exhibition Discarded on the occasion of the 20th anniversary of Operation Storm. Because this exhibition, this initiative critically reflects upon the present socio-political constellation by examining the artists' and collectives' relationship with the past through the medium of discarded books. This is an initiative that took place in Zagreb in June 2015 on the occasion of the 20th anniversary of one of the concluding military operations in the Croatian War of Independence. And this initiative shows that discarded books can act as memory triggers and propel critical reflections, not only about the 90s, but also about the present, thus underlying the inherent potential of discarded books in breaking taboos and rethinking the recent past. And such a critical thinking exercise also leads to the detection and better articulation of current issues, which is a precondition for an active participation in society. As a symbolical representation of the past that has been rejected in the name of promises for a better future, discarded books are regaining currency as it becomes clear that these promises have been broken. The timing of the exhibition was chosen deliberately to draw the public's attention to, as it is written in the exhibition brochure, to the political logic behind the killing and expulsion of people during and in the immediate aftermath of the war and its last major battle, Operation Storm. By focusing on the destruction of books, the exhibition's curators wanted to address the wider context preceding and following this military operation, in which the simultaneous destruction of monuments, houses, and the killing of people were made possible both inside and outside the war zones. Consequently, the background questions that the action raises pertain to post-conflict, but also post-socialist transformation, that is the writing of history, what constitutes the official narrative, the nature of war, justice and the status of victims, refugees, ethno-nationalism as an aspect of neoliberalism, etc. And here are some photos that I took at the exhibition. So there was a scanner. So people were actually asked, there was a call for participation to bring discarded books to the gallery. The exhibition was held in a small gallery called Gallery Nova in the center of Zagreb. And during the exhibition, these books were scanned and then placed online until they were removed due to copyright infringement. So the books are no longer online, but up until recently, the website was still active. www.otpisane.org. What is more, there were also performances that took place. By the way, there was also a table where one could consult all the various newspaper articles about book discarding, particularly in Croatia, that were mostly collected by Ante Lešaja during a period of 20 years. And we are talking about approximately 140 newspaper articles on the topic. And during the exhibition's performances were also held, two of which were held indoors. One was the reading of a book in flames by Siniša Labrović. The performance was called The Light of the Book. And he was reading the Serbian poet Branko Miljković, known for his anti-system behavior and bohemian lifestyle. So reading out loud transforms the intimate act of reading into a performative one. With this gesture, violent but at the same time affectionate, Labrović wishes to enlighten the dark in which books are relegated in the region. Reading a book in flames is a race against time, trying to catch a flash of light before it is swallowed by darkness. And this was not the first time that he performed this, but each time he reads a different book in flames. And the second picture on the right-hand side is called Review or Revision of the Family Library by Božena Končić-Badurina, in which she juxtaposes individual and collective memories, as well as a public and a private library. So basically, she was struck by the discrepancy between the tacit public rejection of books and the private stance of her family, and carried out a revision of her own library and brought then books that would have been discarded based on certain criteria from public libraries, and brought these books from her personal library into a public one, where visitors could also engage with the stories behind each book. So they could listen to the story behind it, and also to some personal memories and recollection. For Božena Končić-Badurina, this was a way of defending the right to identity and remembrance, to one's own relationship with legacy and culture. And as the artist argues, Croatian society has an immature, non-critical relationship towards its own past. So these attempts at completely erasing the memory of socialism are counterproductive and are obstructing a more objective examination of the period, of its bad and good sides, as well as their integration into the present that could only enrich and further develop society. And then two additional performances took place in an outdoor public space, namely at the main square in Zagreb, Ban Josip Jelačić Square, that in Yugoslav times bore the name of Republic Square. Antonio Grgić's performance on the left side addresses the issue of the gulf that is created whenever individual memories need to adapt to the newly imposed ideological memory, in his words, and the performance is called Reading Karl Marx's Thoughts to Ban Jelačić's Horse on the former Republic Square. So with this, the artist wishes to connect Marxist theory about the role of fetishism with the ideological role of culture as a fetish, where culture is considered an ideological war aimed at covering up class antagonisms. And it is not possible to read to the ban, to the governor, as he is too high on his pedestal where he was put by official historiography and is thus too detached from ordinary people. Last but not least, Luisa Margan's Listen performance examines the potential of a joint action in the public space and calls for critical awareness, an artistic and socially engaged consciousness of the citizens. 20 performers read out loud the works of 2 Yugoslav writers, Miroslav Krleža and Danilo Kiš, on different locations at Zagreb's main square. And with this performative sculpture, the artist criticizes the structure of power and the construction of national identities. This critique is articulated through the act of reading that, as in Labrović's case, from an individual becomes a public and performative political and cultural act. So to sum it up, Discarded as a project relies on the symbolic capital of discarded books in order to address present problems that might equally inform the future. It is a collective brainstorming before and after session, if you wish, that compares Croatia as it was in the 90s, what it wanted to become and what it has become. The defeating results of this analysis inevitably lead to a reconsideration of the legacy that was massively discarded at the beginning of the 90s. Was everything even vaguely connected with Yugoslavia that bad? The discarding of books is approached as a synecdochic representation of cultural politics in the 90s that is still awaiting proper scrutiny outside of alternative circles. So I would now stop here and would open the floor to discussion, and would be also interested in hearing experiences from other countries, but also from other times. What you see here on the right is a hygienic kind of tool that is used to hygienize and keep books clean. So what hasn't been achieved in the 90s, or what has been publicly wished for, is now the reality in most libraries around the world, especially after the COVID virus pandemic. So thank you very much for your attention.